Guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Vindictive Ex-Wife Illegally Signed Application to Local HOA in My Name. I'll start this off by saying my ex is vindictive as hell. We've been fully divorced since about right before the pandemic started. We sold the house we shared, and I didn't have to pay her alimony because she cheated and we're in an at-fault state. It was messy since D-Day. All of the stereotypes. First the sobbing and then trickle truths saying, I love you. It was just one time. Okay, it was 2 years. And then the gaslighting followed by, I'm going to take you for everything, before packing her shit and walking out. I feel like I never really knew the woman my ex was in all the time we were together. We were married 5 years and together for 7. And in 2 of those 5 married years she had affairs with 3 other men. The final one being a foreign businessman of some sort from what I could find out. Yes, I got tested for STDs and was thankfully negative. Yes, she got pregnant by the final AP, and no, I didn't sign the birth certificate because I found out about the all affairs before the baby was born thanks to a call from the first AP. My ex tried to go full scorched earth on me. But since we live in and were married in an at-fault state, she lost. We didn't pay equally into our house, and the equity was divided 70/30. So I got a pretty good cash payout when I sold our marital home to put as a down payment on a different house closer to my job. It's a bit of a downgrade. But suits a single guy in his 30s like me just fine. My ex did show up to my house once. But I refused to let her in. She bitched at me that I'd financially ruined her in the divorce. I said that if she was fully willing to do that to me first, and the witch had the audacity to say it should have been my life fucked over, and not hers. I laughed so hard and said it was karma. She yelled that she'd sue me for what was rightfully hers. I said if she was gonna sue me, then to go ahead and sue me. It'd end up the same way in court because she has nothing but a false sob story. She was the cheater, not me. I'm no angel, but I didn't do anything to her. And she was the one who ruined our marriage. She then said she'd tell everyone she could that I abused her. I said I'd sue her for defamation if she did, and I was recording our interaction and had those words saved to my phone. She went wide-eyed and her jaw dropped. The look people are calling the surprised Pikachu face. Then I asked why she was there, if not to just try and make trouble. Because she had a new man in her life that knocked her up. She just huffed at me and said he isn't around much, and she's stuck in a tiny apartment living off his child support till he comes back. It was immature of me, I know, but I did the bit of playing the world's smallest violin. She yelled at me to go duck myself, and I yelled back that I'd sooner do that than her any time. She raged at me and then got in her car to leave. Haven't seen her since. There is an HOA in my neighborhood. But I was not legally obligated to join it because the last owner of my house was not a member. I made sure of that through a real estate lawyer as well. The HOA had no grounds to force me to join and were not happy about it. The HOA president would show up with forms every week for the first month demanding I sign them. Then she threatened to take me to court. To which I had to get a C&D sent to her from my lawyer to make her stop that. So, she started harassing me by looking for any infractions she possibly could to report to the city. An inspector came out several times and found nothing wrong. In fact, I offered one of them a burger while grilling, and they graciously accepted. Did I mention the HOA hates barbecues and parties that aren't approved in advance? Well, they do. And I like to grill when the weather is good. And my neighbors actually love me for it because I invite them over. I had the police called on me several times for noise complaints because I was playing music on a Saturday afternoon while having my friends over. The HOA president I caught trespassing once when she was trying to peer into my windows. I called the police, but she denied ever doing it. So, I got cameras. She hasn't trespassed since. But I still got repeated passive-aggressive letters saying my cameras were not an approved addition to my house. Some months ago, I started getting letters for fines in the mail. And when I contacted the HOA, their representative claimed they had it on record that I'd joined and needed to pay all fees effective immediately. I told them that was not possible. Then they emailed a scanned copy of the forms, and they had a signature on them. But it was not mine. It was very similar in some ways, and I recognized right away as being my ex's handwriting. She knew what my signature looked like. But it was a loose imitation at best. I got in touch with a lawyer right away over the forged signature. But the HOA still demanded to go to court. And it took 7 months before that happened. Meanwhile, they were stacking unpaid fines against me weekly and were threatening to put a lien on my house. We went to court and the HOA president looked very smug. But my lawyer pointed out how the signature wasn't the same as mine and was very inconsistent in the various forms. I'd never allowed the HOA president in my house, and I'd never requested the forms. The idiot HOA president actually slammed her palm on the table and said it was still binding. But when pressed where the fraudulent signature came from, she admitted my ex-wife called the HOA and they sent her the forms, then got them back in the mail signed. But then she actually claimed she'd thought I'd signed them. The judge looked at her and asked if she was serious. She confirmed she was. The judge then asked how a woman I was no longer married to, that had never even lived with me in my current residence, was supposed to have any bearing on whether or not I joined her HOA. She went quiet and I could see the "oh shit" look on her face as the hamster wheels were turning, and she seemed to finally mentally put the pieces together. My lawyer then counterclaimed that what the HOA did was blatant fraud, and legal actions must be taken. And they were. I countersued the HOA for the emotional distress of the harassment I'd gotten since moving in. Which I had lots of proof of. That won me about 10 grand after lawyer fees that I decided to put towards my mortgage. The HOA president was removed from her throne. I like to think she was kicking and screaming. She was also slapped with a hefty fine. I've seen her outside a few times, and she always looks at me like I am the devil. The HOA itself had to pay all of my legal fees too. I wanted to go after my ex for forging my signature. But can't, because not long after she forged my signature on those forms, she apparently left the country to be with her third AP. She's somewhere in Europe from what I can see of the final posts on her FB before she disappeared. So, I can't do anything against her unless she ever returns to the US. So that was a wash. I'm not getting letters from the HOA anymore though. And the new president has promised to keep things completely cordial from now on. I still don't feel like I got much of a win in this though. Other than the $10K payout, it all felt like a huge waste of time. The next story is titled, "Neighbors and their guests trespass on our property, kill our tree and garden, and insult us." So, this isn't just one incident. It's a bunch of things that happened rolled into one post. So, we have these neighbors and they often had parties and get-togethers in their backyard. Now, there is fence blocking their backyard from us, but our backyard isn't blocked off and they can still enter through their driveway. We have a set of swings in our backyard and often, we'd have teenagers from the party randomly coming over to our swing set. I wouldn't have minded it as much if they weren't breaking the swings. The plastic covering the chain ropes was ripping because they were spinning and twisting the swings around. We were very particular about keeping our swings intact because my dad had spent a lot of money on them, and it was an important gift to us. My parents also didn't like strangers trespassing on our property, but they didn't like confrontation, so they'd stay quiet and even sometimes stop us from going out to stop them. So my sister, my brother and I would go to get them off our lawn. They would insult us and call us names. It sounds stupid now, but keep in mind that we were 4, 7, and 12 years old and they were 14 to 18 years old. They'd refuse to leave or even stop twisting the swings around. When our parents confronted theirs, the old witch that they called their mother simply replied with something along the lines of, "Oh, they're just kids. Let them play on the swings." Even when my parents explained how they were ruining the swings, refusing to stop and calling us names, the lady said, "My kids would never do that." Another time, they renovated their fence. They put the pillars of the fence on our property and the workers trampled over our garden. The garden that my grandfather so dearly loved and had worked every day on. Again, when confronted, they gave a half-hearted, if not fake, apology. Another time, and this is more my sister's story than my own, but my sister would go sit on our swing set and play on her own, as an 8-year-old does. The neighbor's oldest kids would often bother her. Even their youngest was 18, their oldest almost graduating university. They'd insult her or shout at her or try to scare her, and when she tried calling for someone like my parents, they'd quickly run inside. And the one that annoyed us the most. So, we used to have a pear tree. We loved the tree. It was big and beautiful and my siblings and I loved climbing it. When I was about 7, it died, and the city had to cut it. The city owned it. We were devastated. We had many good memories with that tree and were thinking of even building a tree house in it. We always thought it died because the neighbors would wash their soapy car wash water down into our backyard and around the tree, which was bad enough on its own, but recently, when we were renovating our house, we found nails hammered into the ground around where the tree used to be. The neighbors had killed their own tree like that as well. You aren't allowed to chop down trees because they are all owned by the city, and had gone out of their way to kill ours as well because they were worried that it would grow so big that some branches would block their windows. So, while we were sleeping, they trespassed onto our backyard and fucking hammered nails into the roots of the tree to kill it. I can't believe that people like that exist. The next story is entitled Neighbor Doesn't Want to Ruin His Garden. His wife also throws weeds into our yard. So, I just remembered this one story involving neighbor I had. He recently moved over 2 hours away. My family never talked to him or his family much. Him and his wife were entitled, self-righteous, and even racist. I never really spoke to him. I'd acknowledge him if he said hi or something. But that is as far as it went. He was one of the type of people where he would only talk to you if he wanted something or call the town if somebody was doing work on their house without a permit, but would do the exact same thing himself. So, in very back end of his backyard was a dying tree that had to come down. His driveway had an open carport, but just beside it was a garden that a cherry picker could easily get through to get to the backyard. But there wouldn't be a story if it was that easy. So, one day, he comes to my parents' door, talking about the tree in his backyard that needed to come down. He then says, "I don't want to ruin our garden, so can the cherry picker come through your yard to get access to mine?" In order for that to work, it would mean dismantling the fence that ran along our property line, and in front of that fence was our own garden, with small trees and large bushes, a composter, stuff like that. There was also a large tree in our backyard with very low branches that would either be damaged or have to be cut off to get the picker to get through. My dad was very blunt in his answer to him. He said, "Hell no. Ruin your own yard and damn garden instead of ours." And pretty much closed the door on him. That was the end of that. So, a few years later, they came to us with something else. Their sewer line collapsed, and it ran under our front yard. How our property was set up, is that it ran almost right to about 6 feet from the side of their house. The property divided by a row of hedge bushes. So that would mean the bushes would have to be pulled out. My dad said to him, "Do what you need to do. But I want you to clean up all rocks from this off my property when this is done, and just know, I plan on putting new bushes in when this is done." My neighbor agreed. After a few days of work, it was all done. The crew did a fairly decent job at cleaning up their mess, at least on our property. His was still a mess. And not long after that, my neighbor and his wife set up a garden on the 6 feet of his property right to the edge of where the bushes used to be. My dad and mom weren't happy about that considering they warned them they planned on putting the bushes back in, but knew it was his property and couldn't say anything. But they planned on still buying hedge bushes eventually and putting them back in on their part of the property. That part never came to fruition. But after the garden was in full bloom, I was walking by one of the windows in my house that looks towards their house and new garden, and I could see the wife out there pulling weeds. But what shocked me, is she was just tossing them onto our lawn. My parents weren't home, so I watched for a bit just to see if she'd clean it up. She didn't. After she was done, she went back into her house. I waited a bit, but she never came back out. Normally I don't care about plants and weeds or anything, but it was strictly the principle that they were tossing something onto my parents' yard and not cleaning it up. So, I went outside where I saw her toss the weeds, and I grabbed every single one I found on the lawn, and tossed them back into her garden. Just in front of me too, was the window to her dining room. I didn't see her, but I hope she was there watching me throw her weeds back into her garden. The last story is titled, Leaf Karen Cuts Down Our Plants for Some Reason. For context, there is a large locust tree in my front yard, and a large Virginia creeper, basically a vine that likes to climb around trees. It's harmless unless it gets way overgrown and blocks sunlight. My next door neighbors just had a baby, and the entitled grandma of the baby came over for a visit. E.g. apparently had seen the tree with the small amount of Virginia creeper and decided she didn't like how it looked. The solution was, apparently, to get her pruning shears and cut it all down of our tree. When my dog started barking at the very weird behavior of the stranger on our lawn, my mom looked out the window and saw E.g. cutting down our Virginia creeper. All of it except a few tiny roots poking out of the ground are gone. My mom went outside and asked her to stop. EG replied with, "Oh, I'm a master gardener and I had to get rid of that." At this point, the very sweet daughter-in-law of EG came outside and tried to get EG back inside. EG was done cutting it down, and eventually obliged. The sweet daughter-in-law apologized to us, and I felt so terrible for her, because she had just had a baby and had to deal with this crazy EG for a few days. Luckily, our Virginia creeper is pretty hardy and will probably grow back just fine next year, but she did make it basically impossible for us to have the gorgeous red leaves and shade this year and maybe next year too. While we only saw her cutting down the Virginia creeper, we have a ton of beautiful and difficult to grow plants in our front yard, so I hope she is done with her master gardening for this visit. Edit. I checked this morning, and EG left branches and leaves all over our yard. It looks like a botanical murder scene. I didn't see that she left all this stuff behind when it first happened, because it was dusk and there wasn't much light. Luckily, she hasn't done anything more today, but she left her shears out leaning against our neighbor's house. Thank you for listening.